everyone, and welcome to the Steele Center lecture. Thank everybody for coming. My name is Jamie Dow, and I'm a professor of philosophy and director of the Steele Center. And the purpose of the Steele Center is to promote the study of philosophy and religion on and beyond the Hendricks campus. We hope to identify, clarify, and contribute to an understanding of the emerging philosophical and religious issues of our time. And tonight we're pleased that our Steele Center lecturer will be Dr. Esther Mombo. And Dr. Emmy Corey, Assistant Professor of Religious Studies, will introduce Dr. Mombo this evening.
You guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Dow, and thank you to the Steele Center for supporting Dr. Mombo's visit. Also for the people who behind the scenes who've been doing a lot of work, Tammy Vanneman and her student team, Morgan Franklin, Ayla East, Sandra Ramirez, and Kaya Jones. It's my honor to introduce you all to Esther Mombo. Dr. Mombo is fresh from a stint as visiting scholar at Columbia Seminary in Decatur, Georgia. She's currently a lecturer in the Department of Theology at St. Paul's University in Limuru, Kenya. She's also held various administrative posts there, including Deputy Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs and Academic Dean. Mombo holds a PhD in Religious History from the University of Edinburgh, a Master in Philosophy from the University of Dublin, and has received honorary degrees from Virginia Theological Seminary as well as Church Divinity School of Pacific. She's also the East Africa coordinator for the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians, a group of scholar activists on the continent who use theology and religious studies to work on their community's most pressing social justice issues. She is also, I'm happy to say, and I hope that she would agree, my friend and a mentor. I first met Esther in 2011. I was a Master of Divinity student in my mid-20s that had no real sense of what I was doing with that degree. I traveled to Kenya with a group of public health and development students to participate in a joint course with other religion, public health, and development students at St. Paul's University, where Dr. Mombo was at the time serving as Deputy Vice Chancellor. I was so excited to meet this leader of the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians, a group that was so influential in my own journey. But I quickly learned that I was not going to get the one-on-one time with Esther that I wanted. She was and is a larger-than-life figure on St. Paul's campus. She would come into our classes long enough to chime in on the conversation, pose quick challenges where she needed to, and then she would duck out to her next responsibility. I didn't quite understand it at the time. I kept thinking, who is this woman? Why can't she just sit down and give us more of her time? It took a few years for me to realize that, like so many women in higher education, Esther was doing the jobs of 3 to 4 people. She was hospitably tending to our class, which was created especially for our American team and an aberration from the regularly scheduled St. Paul's courses. She was serving as an administrator for her university. She was teaching her own courses outside of ours. She was tending to a house that was and is perpetually full of her children, as well as nieces and nephews, brothers and sisters. But it's only now, really, over a decade later, as I settle into my own role as an educator in higher education, that I realized Esther had much bigger fish to fry in 2011 than making sure she granted enough face time to a vocationally adrift young white American fangirl for whom education was always a given. Esther's priorities lay with a different set of students. She was in the midst of doing the work she does best, the never-ending, uncompromising work of making space at her university for marginalized and underrepresented Kenyan students. Women, students living in poverty, students living with HIV, students experiencing violence and displacement, religious minorities, to name a few. Using the lens of religion and theology, a powerful force in these students' lives that can simultaneously hold them captive and liberate them, Dr. Mombo does what so many of us in higher education aspire to do. She meets these students where they are, in a language that matters to them, and she bends over backwards to ensure that they can fully participate in mind, body, and spirit at St. Paul's. She fundraises for scholarships, she goes to bat with colleagues, she opens her office, her home, her life, and her mind, for students to air those moments of frustration and isolation that come with being a minority on campus. From 2007 to 2013, the years that Esther served as Deputy Vice Chancellor at St. Paul's, The number of women students studying religion and theology went from 15 to as many as 50 graduates one year, and hundreds of women graduated during that time, more than 100. Today, she continues her work to make sure that women and other historically marginalized students have a space at St. Paul's, and in just a short time, she'll head back to that work. But for now, tonight, she is, at long last, granting me and all of us a little bit of her time, her work, and her wisdom. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Esther Mombo.
Greetings. Can you hear me? I'm not sure who was being introduced, but I want to say that I'm Esther Mombo, and I'm so delighted to be here tonight. I'm particularly happy that I have met Dr. Amy Corey at her place of work and met her family as well. When I met her, I'm not sure she thought about a family, but I'm glad that she finally chose that route. I'm also grateful to Dr. Amy for meeting me at the airport. I came out because I travel a lot, and it's very nice when you come out and you have a name on a board. I'd like to see so who's speaking to me today. It was good to have been there, smiling, and with my name. So thank you so much. I want also to say thank you to the community for welcoming me. I'm so grateful that I've met so many of the students. Have been in Amy's classes. I'm not sure what I'm paying for, but I've paid for it. But I'm grateful that she has given me that opportunity to do that. When she knew I was coming, she said to me that I'm going to invite you. And I said, that's okay. I thought it was in the distant future, but it is here and I'm here. So thank you. Thank you so much. It's a distinct pleasure and joy to be able to be here, to stand here and to speak tonight. And those who have gone before, who have delivered these lectures and gone before me, I want to salute them. Reading about the center and the work that it does and what the founders thought it should do, I thought, wow, this is a center that I want to have as well. Grateful to Ruth BSA of Damont for making this center realized. The purpose of the center, as it has been said, is equally in unity, as it provides space for people like us to interrogate religion and philosophy. These two are important in many spaces, and even where people tend to think that religion is not important. I come from a space where it determines many of the religious discourses. So it is important that we interrogate religion and philosophy. So thank you for the invitation, and thank you for choosing to come tonight and to listen. I was introduced as a member of the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians, and I'm proudly one. Women who interrogate religion and culture, and how religion and culture are used both to deny and both to discriminate against women. These women have looked at pandemics, and especially the HIV and AIDS pandemic. So many of the things I'm going to say, some have come from the writings of these women. This season, these women are interrogating climate change, pandemics, gender, religion, and women, looking at how these intersect and how they challenge humanity as a whole. I was asked to speak on the topic of the social face of pandemics in East Africa and beyond. Why East Africa? I asked. East Africa is because that is where I live. That is my social location. And beyond, of course, it's beyond. This is part of the beyond. Our experience of pandemics in Kenya has taught us many lessons, and I'm sure those lessons are similar in other parts of the world. As I thought about it, I was reminded of this rhyme that we said at school, and the rhyme was mirror, mirror on the wall. I wonder how many of you ever said that rhyme? Mirror, mirror on the wall. It does not matter if I'm short or tall. If I have a skinny leg or my hips are wide, it only matters who I am inside. Blue eyes, brown eyes, black or green. What makes me most beautiful cannot be seen. When you look at me, you don't judge me by the parts of my brain. The most beautiful thing is my heart. I do not know why we said that rhyme when I was young, but later I could see why it was important in terms of affirmation of who one was. Because with the way one looked may not have been the way they are in their heart. The mirror image, for me, is the important beat of this rhyme. The mirror image fascinates me because the mirror does not lie. Using a mirror means you will change the way you look. If you are going somewhere, you have to change something or add something. And I use that mirror image to talk about pandemics. Pandemics can be seen as a mirror into society. Pandemics are like magnifying glasses into society. They act as a torch to bring to light the true nature of society. The way society is structured and the way society uses different categories to determine who people are and their livelihood. In a Sunday sermon, a bishop by the name of Bishop Masindi noted that COVID-19 is not showing us how to build a house, but the kind of houses we have been building all our own. Generally, pandemics bring to the fore and exposes the lies that we live with, such as equality, social cohesion, etc. Pandemics make us interrogate these subjects deeper with a desire of having a more just community that enhances flourishing. Pandemics challenge religious teachings on humanity and the disconnects that we see between what is taught and what is practiced. Pandemics shed light on people's lived realities. Pandemics have been part of the world community for a long time and in different stages. In this paper, I'm not going to look at the history of pandemics. I won't delve into that, then to stay here the whole evening. Some historians have argued that in each 100 years, there has been a pandemic. And using that trajectory, COVID-19 therefore came in 2020. And they go back to say that when you look at 1520, 1620, 1720, 1820, 1920, and 2020, there was at least a pandemic. 1720, they talk about the bubonic plague at Marseille, called the Great Plague, where an estimated 100,000 people died. In 1820, they talk about the cholera, which killed, the numbers are debatable. Nobody seems to know how many died. And in 1920, they talk about the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu is described as the most unrelenting pandemic. It claimed an estimated registered lives of 100 million people. After another 100 years, then we talk about 2020, confronted with COVID-19. Other than looking at 100 years, or each 100 years, it's important to note that there have been other pandemics, either in between or after, not just the 100-year after. We are reminded of the pandemic of smallpox, syphilis, SARS, malaria, that is still a pandemic in some of the countries, Ebola, HIV, which is still with us, even though people are living longer as a result of ARTs. The naming of the pandemics is dependent on who has power to talk about it, to name it, and to explain it. I have noted, and I continue to note, that pandemics are like magnifying glasses into our societies. And COVID-19 is not the first pandemic, as I have said. In the 1980s, we talk about HIV. The African women theologians spent over 10 years looking at HIV and society. They observed that it was a magnifying glass as it brought to light many issues, including the teachings of the church, the disconnect between what the church taught and what was the lived reality of the people. They talk about HIV bringing to light issues of gender-based violence, and especially sexual gender-based violence. They talk about HIV bringing to light the different disparities in our society, economically, at the level of education, politically. The gap between the rich and the poor, where the majority live in abject poverty and a few have all they need. Or to just say where the poor cannot make ends meet, but the rich make ends over. They talked about HIV as a pandemic providing a perfect way of stereotyping people and marginalizing people. They talk about HIV forcing people to talk about taboo subjects that they do not talk about. So when we think of 2020 and COVID-19, I look at it as a lens to look at society again. That COVID-19 that began in Wuhan, China, in 3 months has spread and was a pandemic. It was known everywhere in the world as a pandemic. When we think of COVID-19 and in the global arena, there are many aspects that come out of it. It has been noted that the reach of the pandemic was just that it had affected the global arena in just about 3 months. Livelihood resulting in physical distancing, economic crisis, and the establishment of new industries in a very short time. As well as being a disease, it brought to light the racial, gender, and class disparities that exist within and across our nations. COVID-19, like other pandemics, brought to light a magnitude of gender-based violence across the world. In my own context, because of close down, we had a rising trend of teenage pregnancies because of disrupted schooling. Gathering for worship of all sorts came to an end, and people resorted to online worship. And that also brought to light more disparities in terms of internet connectivities. So COVID-19, when we use it as a lens, and we use it as a magnifying glass, has said a lot of things about our own society. That in our society, we pretended that things have been okay. We've taught equity, we've taught peace, we've taught justice, but the reality has been different. So like HIV pandemic and now COVID-19 pandemic, we do realize that there are so many things underneath that we don't see every day. that comes out as a result of the pandemic. Speaking about gender-based violence, one of the politicians in Kenya noted that in 6 months, the cases had gone up by 92%. These statistics did not lie, as no day passed without reading about a woman killed. Men were also killed. No life should be taken. Technology, my battery is dying, but I'm not dying.
Send this back.
It doesn't die before it comes back. So issues of violence of any form and of women are shrouded in silence, the politicians say. And to deal with them, it is first to lift the heavy lid of silence. The silence has root causes in the hegemony of patriarchy, which sets men as normative and the standard by which women are assessed. It is to read and interpret both the oral and written texts that harbor the ideology. So patriarchy as a system, it is argued, that has existed and thrives in dichotomizing men and women for that matter. But this ideology, you don't see it or hear it unless there is as an aspect of ill health, like pandemics. Oops. Sorry. I have noted that pandemics force us to rethink society, to rethink issues of relationships. COVID-19 in particular, Chama Kaunda observes that it spread regardless of culture, class, religion, gender, sexuality, race, or religion. It had no respect of persons. It threatened relationships, he argues, the rituals of hugs, handshakes, kisses, or cultural ways of venerating the dead and bereavement, of consoling each other. He talks about COVID-19 being a disease of not touching. There's a lot of humor about COVID-19 in my own context, and one person wrote that if a dead person wakes up from the dead now, he or she will think that every Kenyan has become a doctor because of the masks. Chama Kaunda goes on to observe that whether it was spiritual, whether it was cultural, funerals for families would take place. And this had a potential of creating other problems in the society. So pandemics push us not only to look inward, but to be able to talk about those taboo subjects that we don't talk about in ordinary times. When I look at Ebola in Africa, HIV in Africa, Eastern Africa for that matter, and COVID-19, they push society to talk about death and rituals that accompany death. The challenge of the public health rules and the cultural customs and the faith-based practices. Pandemics push us to rethink those taboos that we hold strongly. So Ebola, HIV, COVID-19 brought enormous disruptions to practices that are at the heart of the social fabric. Among their rituals surrounding the dying person and offering them a befitting funeral, attended by many people, is what is important. Thereafter, whose relatives and family continue to gather to comfort and support the deceased. So these rituals, it is noted, act as a source of comfort, a source of healing, and restoration of wholeness, because death creates wholeness for the family and for the community. The rituals also act as a means of the believed to find meaning in dealing with the mystery of death. So COVID-19 and other pandemics disrupted and posed new questions about this funeral and death rites. It was not just an internal matter, but also an external matter. In looking at the Kenyan context, for example, you hear people very sad in the ways in which they have buried their dead. One woman says, we witnessed horrors and saw hell itself for our deceased loved ones in the community. I saw them drop the corpses of my late child in the ground as though it was a dog. It was a bag of cassava. It was such a painful and sorrowful scene that no one would be happy to see. Another one says, I saw our father being buried as a dog in a small grave in the night. There was a particular case in Kenya where a musician passed on, and after he was buried, his fans came and wanted to bring him back, bring him out of the grave and do another funeral, because they couldn't believe that he would be buried in such a private way. And police had to come to try and deal with that. It has been noted by Timiko Mangu that while there have been many pandemics in the past, he notes that a pandemic like HIV shook the foundations of the community. Others have argued that these pandemics pose a challenge to the religious community who may not understand the microbiology of the disease, but understand something about agony, grief, and hopelessness. So the impact of pandemics cuts across many dimensions of our society, but pushes us to rethink our practices and especially those of funerals. It has been noted that in West Africa, Sierra Leone, for example, there had to be an agreement between religious leaders and health workers in view of curbing the spread of Ebola. Because while the health services, the public health rule was you don't come close to the dead, the family couldn't understand why they couldn't. And so for once, you have religion and science, or faith and health practitioners, faith leaders and health practitioners having to agree that this is the way to work in order to end the pandemic. Pandemics affect the vulnerable in society, and the vulnerable in society are many and of different forms. There are those that are vulnerable because of their sexual orientation. There are those that are vulnerable because of poverty. There are those that are vulnerable because of economic challenges, I've said poverty. So pandemics have had an unprecedented impact on almost every country, every community around the world. However, Not everyone has been affected in the same way. There are social and gendered consequences of the pandemics. While, for example, men and women are affected by pandemics, whether they are HIV, Ebola, or COVID-19 for that, we know that there are those that are at a more risk than others. When you look at COVID-19, for example, we realize that women bore the brunt of the disease, just as they bore the brunt of HIV and continue to bear that brunt. Pasitau argues that although more men contracted the virus and died, women were made more vulnerable, exposed to the indirect consequences of the pandemic for several reasons. Women, in the context of Africa, she argued, were overrepresented at the front lines of the response to the pandemics, as caregivers, not just as mothers, but also as nurses and other healthcare support givers, which increasingly exposed them to the contagion. She argues that over 60% of Africa's workforce and essential service providers were women. At home, women shouldered far more domestic workload than men. Another devastating impact, she says, of the pandemic for women was the prolonged school closure that also led to massive learning loss for the vulnerable learners, especially those that could not go online. And women had to take this workforce of both caring, teaching, feeding, etc. In another space, it's been noted that women academics, that men published more and women published less. So pandemics, as I noted earlier, expose some of the major faultiness in gender relations within our communities. There are many common things that society struggled with as a result of Ebola, HIV, and COVID-19. Almost in all societies, developing, developed, stagnant, they saw an increase of domestic violence. With the lockdown means measures to curb COVID-19 forced people to share the same spaces at a longer time than they normally do. And as a result, the tensions will lead to intimate partner violence. Writing about gender-based violence, women theologians observe that in any form of emergency, whether economic crisis, conflict, or pandemics, gender-based violence rises, and those who suffer are women and children. It seems that the spirits of pre-existing toxic social norms and gender inequalities, economic and social stresses are heightened in every pandemic. So pandemics are a mirror, as I've seen out there, and we expose this aspects. Pandemics are a perfect time for excuses or negative stereotyping and scapegoating. During the pandemics, the source and cause of disease is politicized. When we think of COVID-19 and Wuhan, China, that town was known. Even in my own village, they will talk about Wuhan, China. Myths and legends on the disease began to spread so wide. Who was to blame for the disease? Was it human creation or an accident? Who was it made for? Who is wanting to finish which race? So the source of the disease, the blame game at the hands of the dying masses. We note that according to the World Health Organization, when we think of the devastation of COVID-19. America, Europe, and South Asia had the most COVID-19 confirmed cases. Why was that? A topic for another day. But how come these countries that are the first world had more deaths than the countries that are poor, or the countries in the global south? But when you think even about in these countries, who was dying, who was infected? Writing about the pandemic, COVID-19, C.L. Nash makes the following observation for America. She says, in the US, the saying in the black community is, when America catches a cold, black America catches the flu. Some have, he says, when America catches a cold, black America catches the flu. Some have referenced this phenomenon as a pandemic within a pandemic, where the suffering of the black community is significantly more acute in terms of both health and economic inequalities. This means that racial disparity has loomed large for so long. The issue of the pandemic has only been a portion of what Black Americans see as a clear and present danger in their lives. By engaging a womanist lens to deliberately engage the intersectionality of race, ethnicity, gender, class, one is able to identify patterns of unjust suffering that have brought us to this need. So pandemics shine a light to the economic inequalities in our society. They bring to light the deep sense of selfishness that is among us. During the COVID-19, we witnessed such when protective gear and purchase of drugs had to be done. The richer nations had power to purchase vaccines before the poor nations. It was sad to see COVID-19 patients dying while waiting in line for medication, while the rich, some of the rich had cushioned themselves. In my own country, later it was said that this is a disease of the rich people. It's not a disease of the poor. You can ask yourself, yeah, when you think of the deaths, I look at it not in terms of statistics. There were more funerals of people who are able to buy oxygen than people who are not able to buy oxygen. Those that had access to health care, rumor had it that they had already booked beds in good hospitals. The running joke was that the pandemic is for the rich or those who can afford to buy oxygen, but they died not buying it. The pandemic was an eye-opener in our context for those who naturally would seek medication overseas. But because the borders were closed, they were forced to go to the very health centers that they have not contributed to making. But there are also those who argue that the pandemic was not the COVID-19 itself. The pandemic was hunger. The measures to curb the pandemic supported those that were able in the society. A mother in an informal settlement was heard to say that before COVID kills me, hunger would have killed me. So there are many people in poor spaces who are not able to buy and stock food because for them, they live from hand to mouth. So most of the population that lived in abject poverty, their anxieties, their fears were heightened by COVID itself. It is these vulnerable who could not adhere to the call to stay at home because they must feed their children by earning a daily or getting a daily shopping done, not stocking thing of refrigerators. They don't want to have that. They didn't have the luxury of a refrigerator where they could store before milk. And many don't know how to survive till the following week, never mind securing their financial future. And that's why this mother in the informal settlement says that before the disease kills me, I would have died of hunger. Pandemics force us to look at the same time to the issues and to old issues and ask new questions. In our context, we are forced to rethink colonization and new colonization and how they impact society. Some of them will look at it as the spread of religions such as Christianity in different parts of the world as a colonial activity. That with the spread of colonialism, injustice was planted, and that injustice has not been interrogated. Hence, there are unequal relationships between the different nations. So they would argue that it is not just the disease, the pandemic, that is killing people. Even though it is true, HIV, COVID-19 was decimating people, Ebola had decimated people. What is killing people today is the impact of the economic disparities between the minority and the majority words. These words exist in each of the places and in different ways. And these disparities are rooted in the colonial and neo-colonial systems within the economic field. Historical injustices have been baptized different names, including debt, to the sense that the majority one should be forgiven of the debt. No interrogation has been done in terms of who to whose debt, so that it is now being paid back. In a conference of religious leaders, they said the following: the human costs of the international debt burden is intolerable. Its effects are evil and sinful. We are not asking for debt forgiveness, we are asking for justice. The call here is that of justice that creates a new form of partnership within and between people and nations. Speaking as a Christian woman, I look at my faith tradition as a source to empower me to discuss some of these things. And African women theologians observe that pandemics give us opportunities to look back and to move forward. COVID-19, they argue, which mandated worldwide lockdowns, quarantine, social distancing, sanitizing, masking, vaccinating, boosting, flattening the curve, Zooming, self-isolation, and a new normal, among others. They put African women, they argue, and their communities under intensified poverty, increased burden of care, rocketing gender-based violence, skyrocketing inflation, and collapsing of economies. We cannot continue doing these things the usual way in an unusual circumstance. Pandemics offer us the opportunities to interrogate in different ways the challenges that face us and our communities. So for those who belong to a faith tradition, like me as a Christian, I offer three things. That is, first, to acknowledge our complicity in perpetuating the spread of the virus of COVID-19 in the form of the manifestations of racial justice, capitalism, and economic inequalities. This means that we work towards justice. Bishop Tutu says, there seems to be either a silence over some of these issues, which remind me of what Tutu says. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. Or Edmund Burke, who says, all that is needed for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. In this presentation, I've tried to show that pandemics are a mirror to our society. I've tried to show that pandemics show the worst of our societies that we don't see because it is inside. I've tried to show that pandemics force us to talk about taboo subjects like death. They force us, of course, to talk about taboo subjects like gender and sexuality, which HIV and AIDS forced us to. I try to show that pandemics challenge us to think new ways of relationships than these hierarchical, oppressive, and exploitative ways. It's my hope that before the next pandemic, we would have been able to deal with some of the things that the pandemic have brought to light this time.